again, and welcome to the recording of the Johnson Street Reach Conference 2022, titled Living Out Your 111. Have you ever heard the word Sabbath, or even wondered how it might be relevant in today's culture? Well, Kevin Huddleston takes time to share his knowledge and research on this sacred moment and how God is inviting us to be part of Sabbath with Him.
These are some handouts, and I'm gonna be like a school teacher and save the handouts for the end. So they'll be here, and it's just these handouts are my doctoral work was on Sabbath as mission, and one of the project, you guys were a part of that project, was having families experience a form of Sabbath. And so we kind of did some things to help them prepare for that and what that might look like. And that's what this is. It's just it's what we gave to our project group, and hopefully it helps somewhat in understanding Sabbath. So, okay. I think I'm going to start this just like I did last time with someone reading. Okay, who was in here the last time? Anybody in here? All right, so you may hear some of the same stuff, but you're good. So you can keep me on track when you go, well, and that's not what you said last time. I'll let you keep me honest, okay? All right. Okay. I would like for someone, if you would, turn to Psalm 136. And I would like for someone to read that. And while you're turning there, I'll let you look at it and decide if you want to be the one that reads it. It is an awkward psalm. It is the psalm that has the constant refrain, His steadfast love endures forever, depending on the version that you're reading from. And so it's like, okay, are we going to say that every time? Yes, and there are reasons behind that, so we'll get to that in a little bit. So, is anybody that would like to volunteer to read that for me? I was hoping you would, but I wasn't going to put you on the spot. When I say Sabbath, what do you think of? What images, pictures, ideas come to mind when you hear the word Sabbath? Rest? Okay, maybe telling that we all had to sit there for a little bit, but rest? Okay, let me close this.
Old Testament.
Okay, Old Testament. Thank you.
I think of Abraham Heschel.
Of course, Abraham Heschel. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel is just the voice on Sabbath in contemporary age. So, great book. Well, my guess is that there are a lot of different ideas, but for the most part, those ideas, the images, the things that we think of when we think of Sabbath, it's a foreign experience for us. It's a foreign concept. It's something that happened a long time ago, or that those people do. And I need to stop right now and say, just ask for prayers of peace and blessing and shalom for Congregation Beth Israel in Colleyville. That's where the hostage situation was yesterday. In the middle of their day of Sabbath, this was their experience when some of the congregants and the rabbi were taken hostage. But ask for your prayers for that community and for all of us as we make sense of that. But a lot of different ideas on Sabbath, but for the most part, it's something that's foreign to us. When I start talking about Sabbath, what I want to make sure that I'm not necessarily encouraging us to step into and recreate a traditional Jewish Sabbath experience. Now, there are some families that do that, and Harold, you were just talking about some experience that you guys had with a Sabbath, with the lighting of the candles, and very much, amen. Very much more a traditional experience. And I think those experiences can be really good. But I'm not necessarily encouraging us to recreate that with our families. But I want you to think of Sabbath and think of a time of we're going to set some fence posts. We're going to set some boundaries. And during this time, we're going to turn off the screens. We're going to slow down the pace. And we're going to be more intentional with our life and more intentional about being aware to God's presence and God's power and God's movement in our life. And so that's what I want you to think of when you think of Sabbath. So today I want to root this in a theological foundation for this, and we are going to do that with Psalm 136. Now, there are plenty of places that we can go to with a theological foundation of Sabbath. And Psalm 136 points us to two of those directions, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But we see Sabbath throughout the Old Testament. We see Sabbath in the New Testament, and a lot of times when we see Sabbath in the New Testament, we see Jesus getting in trouble with Sabbath because he's not observing Sabbath the way others think he should observe Sabbath. Because by the time we get to the New Testament, Sabbath has become not a blessing, but it's become a legalized experience. It's become something that has a lot of stuff attached to it. But lots of different places. But we're going to root this morning in Psalm 136. Again, a little bit awkward as you read this psalm. I told the group last week, my first real experience with this psalm, it was in about 1975 or 76, and we had grad students come out from ACU, and they would preach at the little church there at Ira. And on a Sunday night during the winter, so it was dark, this graduate student came in, and the whole night was about Psalm 136. And in this little rural church in West Texas, all the lights were off and candles were lit. Which, if that's 1975, little rural congregation in West Texas, that's pretty foreign. But it was a reading of Psalm 136, and I thought this is the most boring psalm ever. Because if you take "and his steadfast love endures forever" out of it, you cut the psalm in half. But there's important reasons why that refrain is there. And I want to ask you to just listen to this psalm as we move into this time to look at Sabbath.
Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever. Oh, give thanks to the God of gods, for his steadfast love endures forever. Oh, give thanks to the Lord of lords, for his steadfast love endures forever. Who alone does great wonders, for his steadfast love endures forever. Who by understanding made the heavens, for his steadfast love endures forever. Who spread out the earth on the waters, for his steadfast love endures forever. Who made the great lights, for his steadfast love endures forever. The sun to rule over the day, for his steadfast love endures forever. The moon and stars to rule over the night, for his steadfast love endures forever. Who struck Egypt through their firstborn, for his steadfast love endures forever. And brought Israel out from among them, for his steadfast love endures forever. With a strong hand and an outstretched arm, for his steadfast love endures forever. Who divided the Red Sea in two, for his steadfast love endures forever, and made Israel pass through the middle of it, for his steadfast love endures forever. But overthrew Pharaoh and his army in the Red Sea, for his steadfast love endures forever. Who led his people through the wilderness, for his steadfast love endures forever. Who struck down great kings, for his steadfast love endures forever, and killed famous kings, for his steadfast love endures forever. Sihon, king of the Amorites, for his steadfast love endures forever. And Og, king of Bashan, for his steadfast love endures forever. And gave their land as a heritage, for his steadfast love endures forever. A heritage to his servant Israel, for his steadfast love endures forever. It is he who remembered us in our lowly estate, for his steadfast love endures forever, and rescued us from our foes, for his steadfast love endures forever. Who gives food to all flesh, for his steadfast love endures forever. Oh, give thanks to the God of heaven, for his steadfast love endures forever.
I have to tell you, come a long ways from that Sunday night when I thought that was the most boring psalm ever. In fact, I really believe I'm in a place now where it would do me well to begin every day with that psalm, with that reminder that his steadfast love endures forever. And I believe that that is at the heart of Sabbath, that we are reminded in Sabbath, in this Sabbath rest, that God's steadfast love endures forever. All the stuff that we can attain in this world, all of it will fade away. But his steadfast love endures forever. I mean, it's been interesting to me to watch this steeple out here over the years. This is now, in the time that I've been in San Angelo, this is, I believe, the third time that there's been a reworking of that steeple. And there will come a time when that steeple will be beyond repair. But his steadfast love endures forever. And so the reminder of that. This psalm is not a traditional Sabbath psalm. And in fact, I again told the group last week that I got in trouble with this psalm in graduate school when I was working on my master's, because I was doing some work then on Sabbath, and I decided I wanted to write this final paper on Sabbath. And I used this psalm as my kind of my foundation for that paper. And I wrote the paper, and my professor wanted a preview of the paper before we turned it in to make sure we were on track. And so about 2 weeks out, I sent my paper in previewed. He looked at it, sent back 3 pages, single-spaced pages of notes on all the reasons that it was absolutely ridiculous for me to write a paper on Sabbath using this psalm, that I could not do it. And this is what I needed to do. And he basically outlined the paper that he wanted me to write. So I read all of his notes. He's telling me I can't do it. It's not a Sabbath psalm. I've got these rabbis saying it is used in Sabbath. Look at my professor, listen to these rabbis. I'm kind of stubborn. I wrote my paper. I refused to write his paper. In all of my graduate school, it was the only course I did not get an A in. Still kind of chaps me. But then when I did my doctoral work, I came back, and I'm just so enamored with Sabbath, and it just meaning so much to me. I went to the director of the program and said, I want to write my paper. I want to read it in Psalm 136. And he looked at it, looked at some of my stuff, and he said, I think that's absolutely perfect. So I wrote my paper, my project. This is it. Rooted in Psalm 136. But this psalm, it takes the Israelites and it takes them back to the 2 foundational stories in the life of Israel. And it's the creation story and the story of the Exodus. And in these stories, telling the story of creation and the story of the Exodus, wrapped in them is this refrain, his steadfast love endures forever. It is this rhythm. In my paper, I say it is the heartbeat of God that is written in this psalm. But it's not just in this psalm. This psalm points us to the fact that this heartbeat of God is in all of creation. Just think about it. Think about our world and our experience. There is this innate rhythm of life, right? Sounds like I should start singing The Lion King or something now. There is this rhythm of life. There's this heartbeat in there. You see it in the migration of animals and birds You see it in the tides. And even with a volcano exploding underwater, it's still that changes the tide for a bit, but then it comes back to this normal rhythm. It is a rhythm of life. And if the last 2 years have taught us anything, they have taught us that we cannot escape the rhythm of life. This room is filled with stories today of that rhythm. We could tell story after story in here, in this room, of how we have experienced the rhythm of life in these last 2 years. In those that we have lost, but also in the new births, in the marriages, in the changes in our life. There is this rhythm. And that rhythm of life, written in Psalm 136, that rhythm of life takes us back to creation. It takes us to Exodus. And in that we find, I believe, the very center of Sabbath. And so I'm going to say this. And sometimes when I say this, I see people go, that's not right. So since you're hearing this 2 times in a row, you can go, oh. When we think of Sabbath, we think of rest, we think of all these different things. The goal of Sabbath is not rest. All right? Like, the first time I thought of that and read that, I'm like, no way, that's wrong. This is heresy. The goal of Sabbath is not rest. The goal of Sabbath is the formation of a people who are wholly attentive to God. All right? The goal of Sabbath is not rest. The goal of Sabbath is the formation of people who are wholly attentive to God. But the way of Sabbath is rest. The way we are formed as a people who become wholly attentive to God and attentive to holiness, let me say it that way, is that we are people who are able to slow down. And it's not that all of a sudden God just did something great and we should pay attention. It is that God is present everywhere in this rhythm of life. God is at work all the time. We just miss it, right? We just miss it. So when we think of the goal of Sabbath is the formation of a people, let's go back to the creation story. I want you to go back to these days of creation. And God is creating. At the end of every day, God says this is good, right? God rests and says this is good. Now, it is interesting that in the story of creation, and you realize that it says, and there was evening and there was morning the first day. And there was evening and there was morning the second day. What is up with that? Shouldn't it be there was morning and there was evening, right? Why does it say there is evening and there was morning? The Jewish day begins at evening. The Jewish day begins at sundown. And so think of this, that the very first thing that creation does in a day, the very first thing that we do in a day that begins at evening is not we do stuff, but we rest. Interesting. So these days of creation, we get all the way through these 6 days of creation, and then there's the 7th day. And on the 7th day, what does God create on the 7th day? Nothing. Nothing. That's why I always read it. That's why I always taught. There's rabbinic tradition, though, that God did create on the 7th day. That it was on the 7th day that God created rest. I'm going to give you a couple of words here. And one of them, shalom, you understand, right? We normally think of it as peace. It is also used as a term of hello and goodbye, shalom. But it's this deep sense of peace. The other word is manua. Did I say that correctly, close enough? Probably. I love these different terms. Everybody says them differently. I'm like, okay, I've been saying that wrong all my life. And then somebody says it, well, okay. And manua is this sense of everything is right. It is that sense of, let's see, who we got? We've got creators in here. We've got, actors. And Laura, have you ever had a show that you got a rehearsal, everybody's working, and you've been working on it, it's frustrating, but then you get this point that's been awkward, and you get there, and it just clicks, and it's right. And you go, that's manua. That is, on the seventh day, God said, He didn't say this is perfect. It's a difference here. He said this is good. This is right. And so this idea of Sabbath, that on the seventh day, God does, by not creating, God creates. And He creates this sense of peace and the shalom and this manua, this is right. And in that moment, and this is, I know I didn't mention this last week, in that moment, there is this sense of right here, this is right. This is all good. And this is a taste. This is a taste of what all creation someday will experience. All right? That Sabbath rest isn't just a sit here and go, okay, we're just going to sit here and do nothing. It is a sense of, this is good, this is right, everything is in order, it's good, and someday. And it creates in us a longing for the someday, the coming Sabbath. All right? So when we think about that, and on the seventh day that God did that, we get to the seventh day and we say God rested, and Scripture says God rested. But why did God rest on the seventh day? Why did He stop? Was He tired? Did He need to rest? Do you ever think of a God getting tired?
He finished what He was planned to do.
Okay, so He not that He was tired, but that He finished. This is also an really interesting thing right here. When Jesus is our Sabbath rest, at creation, God says, this is good. This is very good. On the cross, Jesus said, it is finished. I think really important connections there in Sabbath and new Sabbath and complete Sabbath. But did he stop because He ran out of ideas? This is the one that kind of blows my mind. No, He hadn't. God's creative abilities had not exhausted themselves. You think about this fact that, and I always use this example here because I remember when I got that big box of crayons. I always got little boxes, oh, got a little. And then I finally got the big box of crayons. Like, oh, wow. I've got every color imaginable. They're all right there. There are colors that will never go in our crayon box because God didn't create that color. Believe it, this kind of blows your mind that there are colors that we will never see that in the mind of God were possible, but He didn't create them. For you musical people in here, there are musical notes that we will never hear because God chose not to create those musical notes. Now, some of us try to create some musical notes on our own, and they're kind of scary, but there are notes that we will never hear because God didn't create them. Maybe the angels in heaven will someday sing those notes, but not now. There are animals that we will never see because God didn't create them. God didn't stop creating because He was tired. He didn't stop creating because He ran out of ideas. And this is a key part of Sabbath. God stopped Because our God is a God who is able to say, that's enough. And that is one of the aspects of Sabbath. When we sit with God in rest, when we sit with God in attentiveness, we are allowing God to shape and form us as a people who are able to say, that's enough. Does anybody else have a problem with saying that's enough? Is that an issue for any of us? It is for me. I really didn't need a second cup of coffee this morning. But I wanted one, so I'll have another one. Just got through the holidays. Anybody ever have trouble saying, it's enough pumpkin pie? I'm not sure, is there ever really enough? But enough. And so, as Sabbath people, we are being formed in the way of a God who is able to say, that's enough. Now, this is one of the places where I say, I love my project. I know a lot of folks who have done doctoral work, and by the time they're through writing their project and their thesis and everything, they're like, I never want to see that again. I have probably read more and written more since than I did during. And this is where I am. I believe that you look at any of the ills that face our society today, I believe that one of the first steps in correcting those things and making things right again is leaning into a Sabbath rhythm. Think about it. If we could, as a people, say, that's enough. One of the interesting things about Sabbath is that in Sabbath, think about this time of setting this time and saying, we're going to, from here to here, we're going to pay attention to God. We're going to prepare. The Jewish tradition, let me go back to this. The Jewish tradition is not, hey, it's Sabbath today. We're not going to do anything. No, the Jewish tradition is, Sabbath's coming. And we're going to take 3 days. It's going to take us 3 days to prepare for Sabbath. All right. Now there is this sense in reading and paying attention to some of the things in the Jewish culture. There is this sense that as Sabbath approaches, the excitement is not unlike what we might have experienced on Christmas Eve as children. But that comes once a year. But in the Jewish tradition, it is 3 days of preparing for Sabbath, and Sabbath's almost here, and the children are excited about Sabbath. Now, one of my ideas of Sabbath growing up was, sounds like 24 hours at church, right? And there was nothing in my being that made me excited about 24 hours of church. Not anything. We had gospel meetings, and we were on the short end of the gospel meetings. Our gospel meetings began on Saturday night, and they ended on Wednesday night. And I hear these stories of 2-week-long gospel meetings, and I think Johnson Street was found out of a gospel meeting that lasted 2 months, maybe longer than that. And so to think about, Sabbath is 24 hours of church. No, Sabbath is a time of delight and refreshing. And it is a time of where you lay down the work, but it's also a time of joy and hospitality and fellowship. And so these 3 days of preparation for Sabbath, we take 3 days to prepare. We purchase everything. And then as sundown approaches on Friday night, candles are lit and we enter into Sabbath. And we don't create Sabbath. One of the phrases I had to rethink as we were doing our project was, okay, now we're going to do Sabbath. No, you don't do Sabbath. You enter into Sabbath. It's something we enter into. It's a time of rest and being in God's presence. And so we're getting ready. The candles are lit. We enter into Sabbath. And then we have this day of being in Sabbath rest and different experiences. And then Sabbath is over, and there's 3 days of reflection on Sabbath. And it's, what did God do during Sabbath? How was God present to us? How were we present to Him? What did we see in God? What did we see in ourselves during Sabbath? And we reflect on that. And then, it's time to get ready again. Abraham Joshua Heschel writes his book, Sabbath, incredible book. And probably the statement that is the kind of linchpin for my work. He says, the higher goal of spiritual living is not to attain knowledge, but to face sacred moments. Now, Heschel wrote this in the 40s, and the idea was, that our purpose in life, to grow as spiritual living, is not, we're going to know everything that Scripture says. It's not to attain knowledge, but it is to be formed as people who recognize sacred moments and face those sacred moments and step into those sacred moments. And I believe if he were writing that today, he might say, the higher goal of spiritual living is not to attain knowledge or more wealth or more this or more that. But still, if we want to be people fully formed in the image of God and experience life as followers of God, then we are people who recognize the sacred that's happening all around us. Story that really kind of helps me understand that. I guess it was in 2019. We were Shelley and I. We were up at Glorieta, up in New Mexico, and I was speaking for a week up there. And our kids and our grandsons were with us, and we were about the second or third night there. And we've been over to this one place and done all these different activities. And Hudson is walking with me. Hudson was at that time, he would have been 4. He's walking with me. And we get almost back to the cabin, the place we're staying. And Hudson just locks down. I mean, it's like I'm dragging him. What's going on? Hudson's a little bit stubborn. He gets that from his mom, who gets that. Well, never mind. He's a little bit stubborn, and he just locks down, and he won't go. And I turn and look at him, and he's just like... And so we're up at altitude in New Mexico. Crisp air, completely cloudless skies. There's no lights, and the stars are just... And Hudson lives in Kerrville. I mean, it's beautiful there, right? And they've got times when they can see stars, but he's seeing something he's never seen before. And he stops and he looks at me, and we're Honey and Bear, that's our grandparent names. And he goes, "Bear, the stars." And he's like almost out of breath. I'm like, "Oh yeah." And then I think he caught that I was being a little bit dismissive. And he says, "And Bear, that star right there, that's the one that was there when Jesus was born." I'm like, "Okay." And then he says, "Bear, just trust me. I've seen pictures." And then he says, "And besides, my eyes are better than yours." And his eyes are better than mine. But his eyes are better than mine. As we sit with God in this time where we are completely devoted to God and asking God to do work in our lives, God is shaping us to be a different kind of people. And He gives us better eyes, and better ears, and better hearts. And so Heschel says in his book, The Sabbath, the whole thing is that Sabbath is this time of intense formation. And I started to say intense training. I don't want to use that word. It is formation. It is a shaping from the inside out and from the outside in. It's a shaping from all directions. It's like a piece of clay in your hand. You're shaping and forming. And God is using all this time to shape and form us to be a different kind of people. It's God doing this incredible creative work, making us like you taking all these different ingredients and you're shaping and forming, and you end up with this incredible dish, this meal. That's what God's doing with us. He's shaping and forming us in this time. And He's saying, in this time, pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. And what happens is, through this time of formation, we become a different kind of people. And those things that were happening all around us, those sacred moments that were happening all around us, that we were oblivious to, we begin to notice and pay attention to. It's like if Reagan, if you were like, you got your perfect truck. You're driving a truck now. It's like a truck. It's not like a Volkswagen Bug, right? Yeah, I wouldn't see you in a Volkswagen. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with a Volkswagen Bug, but you got, man, this is a perfect truck, and you find it, and you purchase this truck, and you think, this is the best truck in the world. There's never been another truck like this. There will never be another truck ever again like this truck, and you drive it off the lot, and there's one that looks just like it. Y'all have never had that experience, right? I don't know how many times I've been sitting at a stoplight and going, wow, I'm following myself. But that's what's happens in this time of spiritual formation during Sabbath, is we begin to be sensitized to the way God's working in the world. And we begin seeing these things in this time that's intentional, so that we then become aware of those sacred things that are happening all around us all the time. I think one of the... Wow. Can you even say this? It's been a tough 2 years. Can anybody admit that? There's been some really good things that have happened in these last 2 years too. One of the things that this pandemic came right on the heels of my time in school and writing this. One of the things that's happened with Shelley and I, we've become much more intentional about neighborhood walks. Y'all get to see us. And I want to believe that some of that is from our time with Sabbath, and I believe it is. I mean, it's and so we walk our neighborhood and we see people out cooking and all kinds of great things in their backyard, and it smells up the neighborhood, and that would be Trey. But we begin to know our neighbors a lot better. And as we walk, we've been able to pray for our neighbors as we walk. And have become more aware that God's doing things in our community. And as God works in our community, He's inviting us to be part of that. God has never called us to be a people who is not invested in their community. God's already there. I remember years ago we took our second trip to Mexico. I went to Saragossa. I guess it was right here. The three of us were on that trip. Trey and Laura and I. There were other people. It wasn't just the three of us. And we're getting everything ready. We're going to Saragossa, Mexico, and we're doing all this stuff, and we're getting ready. We're going to take Jesus to Saragossa, and we're studying language, and we're going to take Jesus to Saragossa. And we drove all the way to South Texas, then crossed the border to Monterey, and then we winded up that road that was like straight off that side, and we kept going, and we kept going to the end of the road, we thought, and there was one more village, and we went to that village, and we took Jesus to Saragossa. And you know what? We got there and we found out Jesus was already there. As I believe Sabbath is a time for us to stop and realize that God is all around us. And He is inviting us to join Him in what He's doing. In Sabbath, I know I'm getting short on time here. In Sabbath, that is a time when we lay down all of our ambitions. All of our desires, all our ambitions are laid down. Whether financial ambitions, social ambitions, political ambitions, and I could really talk a whole lot right here. But Sabbath is a time and a place where we lay all of our ambitions down and say there is nothing more important than being in the presence of God and letting our heart beat sync to the heartbeat of God. Let me stop for just a second. I've just been talking. Did you hear a few things, a few twists? All right. Let me stop and see questions, thoughts, comments, and then I'll do a couple of things to close us out.
I keep thinking that on the seventh day, God did all this creation in 6 days. And working on projects and stuff like that, you need a time to look back to what you did so you can enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
And it never hit me because God knew I'm fixing to hand this off to people that are going to make a mess of it. So once a week, we have to look back and ask ourselves, what are we doing this for?
Oh man, right. Right, that's good.
To stay grounded.
Yeah. And I think there's the looking back and then also the looking forward in anticipation of Sabbath in Jesus and new creation.
Jesus did the same thing on the cross.
Right.
It's done. We've done all we can do.
Right.
Now it's time to hand it off.
Good. And there's a point. There's so much that I want to talk about all this. And I've been trying to stay pretty focused in this one area. I think this is really significant. When we talked about a Sabbath in creation, I didn't talk about Sabbath in the Exodus story, and then especially the Ten Commandments, because that's where we get that. These 3 commandments, first 3 commandments, deal with man's relationship to God. The final 6 deal with man's relationship to man. Commandment number 4 is a commandment on Sabbath. I believe it is a literary and a theological bridge between the two. It is in Sabbath that we remember who we are. It is in Sabbath that we remember who God is. And it is in Sabbath that we learn how to be attentive to God and love God in the way we should love God, and attentive to our fellow man and love man the way we ought to. It is a literary and theological bridge between the two. And so I say that, and then this. On those 6 days, I love this. On those 6 days, God did. God did all these things. On the 7th day, God just was. In Sabbath, we learn this as well. I'll come over here. I'm going to get right in. This is a close-up. Come right over here and say, "Hey, I'm Kevin. What's your name?"
Corey.
Corey, what do you do?
I'm an HVAC technician at ASU.
All right. Well, and so, and I say, well, I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to be when I grow up. So our identity becomes wrapped up in what we do, right? What you do, and I told when I'm now one of the chaplains for the fire department, when I met with them, I was talking to all these firefighters about their job, and that what they do is so important. And we love them and appreciate them for what they do. What you do is really important. But more than that, more than what you do, who you are is important. And on 6 days God did, and on the seventh day God was. On the seventh day, on a Sabbath, in a Sabbath rhythm, we begin to lay down our identity that's wrapped up in all the things we do or don't do. And we accept the fact that we are valuable, that we are loved because of who we are. It's not just our doing, it is our being. And I believe in Sabbath we begin to take strides toward getting our being right. And if we can take strides toward getting our being right, it informs all of our doing. Does that make sense? And so when we talk about going to Mexico on a mission trip, and we talk about what we can do, what we can do, what are we going to do, it's important. Bigger question, better question is, what kind of people are we going to be while we're doing those things? This world's filled with a lot of people who are doing good things who are being absolute jerks while they're doing it. Right? Sabbath helps us reorder our being so that then we can reorder our doing. I guess it's probably time, isn't it? All right. So what did I not say that I was supposed to have said today? Shelley's heard all this stuff. She has to hear this stuff all the time. I'm going to pray, and as I pray, I want to just say thank you for being here, being a part of this conversation. I would love to continue in conversation. I will talk about this all the time. I love what I believe God does through people who desire to be attentive to Him. So let me pray. God, thank you for this day. God, I thank you for the people in this room. And Father, I pray that right now, in this very moment, that we will know that you, as the creator of all things, you are looking to each one of us, and you are saying that we're good. Father, I pray that right now each one of us will sense the heartbeat of your steadfast and enduring love. And Father, I pray that if not today, sometime this week, I pray that every one of us will be intentional about setting aside some time to be in your presence, to pay attention to you, to pay attention to what you're doing in our world, to pay attention to what you're doing inside of us, and to hear your call as you invite us to partner with you. God, we thank you for your grace and your mercy. We thank you for Sabbath rest. And Father, we thank you that Jesus has come so that we all might, through Him, enter into Sabbath rest. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen.